They tell you awakening is beautiful. They paint it with gold dust and lotus flowers, but they forget to mention that before anything blossoms, something must rot. The ego doesn't go quietly. It howls, claws, and rips through your mind like a wounded beast. And in that moment, when everything familiar begins to disappear, you mistake this spiritual death for your actual demise. The first thing you lose is your reflection, the one you admired, even if you hated it. The identity you've crafted like a monument, brick by careful brick, starts to collapse. Your accolades, your labels, your name itself begins to sound foreign. You look in the mirror and you don't see a self. You see a question, then comes the silence, not peace. No, that comes much later. This is a heavy silence, the kind that sinks into your bones. Conversations begin to feel absurd. Small talk nauseates you. The old distractions don't numb you anymore. You sit in a quiet room, and for the first time, you feel every wound you've ignored your entire life whispering beneath your skin. The ego fears silence. It thrives in noise, in chaos, in clapping hands and crowded rooms. So when you finally begin to hear that quiet, it panics, it creates drama, it tries to pull you back into gossip, ambition, indulgence, anything to avoid the death that is coming. And this is the battleground. Most people lose right here. They turn the volume back up and pretend they never heard the silence speak. What people call awakening often begins with nausea, not metaphorical. Real nausea, physical aches, sleepless nights. You are grieving someone you can't bury, the version of yourself you pretended to be for years, and the worst part, no one else sees the funeral. You walk around in your pain while the world just keeps turning. The show goes on, only now you no longer feel like part of the cast. You begin questioning everything, your beliefs, your relationships, your career. You open the doors of your mind and find them filled with inherited furniture, beliefs passed down from frightened parents, broken lovers, teachers with tight smiles, and you realize none of it is truly yours. That's when the vertigo starts. You're standing on nothing, floating in thought. This is when most call it a breakdown, because there are no words in our culture for ego death. So they say you've changed, you're not yourself. And they're right. You're not, but they say it like it's a curse, like your healing is a betrayal, because your awakening forces them to question their slumber, and they resent you for that. You stop relating to those you once called friends. Their conversations taste like sugar-coated poison. They talk about people, trends, empty victories. You ache for meaning, and when you try to speak your new truth, they tilt their heads like you've gone mad. Maybe you have, but maybe madness is the only honest response to a world built on illusions. The body feels it too. You'll notice old pains resurface, your appetite shifts, light feels different on your skin. You sense things before they happen. You dream in riddles. Your nervous system is rewiring itself because your old patterns can't survive this new frequency. It's not just a mental transformation. It's biological. You may find yourself crying for no reason, smiling at strange moments. The veil thins. Time stretches and bends. The past merges with the present. You see patterns you missed before. Cycles, warnings, red flags in people you trusted. The veil wasn't protecting you, it was blinding you, and now that it's gone, the world feels both terrifying and painfully honest. The ego does not die in one clean blow. It dies in layers, in whispers, in echoes. It returns disguised as progress, as ambition, as control. It tells you you're healing so it can seduce you back into safety. But healing isn't safety. Healing is the fire, and the ego fears the flame. You begin losing things, not just friends or possessions. You lose cravings. You lose certain dreams. You lose your desire to prove, your need to be liked. You lose the taste for vengeance. You don't want to fight anymore, not because you're weak, but because you finally see the war was inside you all along. But there's a cost, a heavy one. The spiritual path isn't lit with fairy dust. It's paved with the bones of who you used to be. Every step forward is a step away from your comfort. Every revelation peels another layer of your old self, and you're not sure how many layers are left. That uncertainty becomes your new home. There are nights when you'll wish you never woke up. Because illusion was warm, it was familiar, you knew your role, but now you're cast into a wilderness with no script, and your only compass is a whisper you hope isn't madness, the voice within that says, keep going, even if it kills you. They dress you in ideals from the moment you arrive. They hand you mirrors and medals, tell you to chase applause, to wear success like a crown. They fill your head with phrases like be someone, make your name, win the world, and before you can even understand what you are, you're already performing for the crowd. You begin to believe the mask is your face, that your worth is measured in titles, in trophies, in the way people pronounce your name in rooms you'll never walk into. You chase money because they told you it buys freedom. You chase beauty because they told you it buys love, and you chase recognition because they told you it means you're real. But the awakening comes like a thief, quiet, ruthless. It begins by stealing the joy from your accomplishments. Suddenly, the same things that once gave you a high feel hollow, the praise, the likes, the promotions, they taste like dust in your mouth. You start to wonder if you ever wanted these things at all. Or if you were just conditioned to want them. You stare at your bank account and feel empty. You look at your curated photos and see a stranger. You walk through your life like a ghost, haunted by the version of yourself you worked so hard to build. And now it begins to fall apart, not because you failed, but because you awakened. They don't warn you that awakening feels like being robbed, not of your possessions, but of your illusions. You lose your certainty. Your ambition mutates, your desires dissolve. You realize that most of what you pursued wasn't yours. It was planted, put there by a system that profits from your emptiness. It strips you naked, and not in the romantic, poetic way. In the brutal way, it leaves you without a compass. You no longer know who you are, because everything you were taught to value no longer matters. You once stood tall because of your image. Now you fall because of your truth. And that fall is where most people break. The world doesn't know what to do with someone who stops worshipping its idols. They'll say you're lazy, unmotivated, lost, because they only understand drive when it's aimed at the same hollow finish lines they're running toward. You've turned your back on the race, and they call it failure. You begin to speak less, smile less. You start pulling away from the circles that once excited you. It's not depression, it's clarity. You see through things now. You see how people sell their souls for attention, how they betray themselves for status. You can't participate anymore, not because you don't care, but because you finally do, and yet it hurts. God, it hurts. Because you gave years, sometimes decades, to a dream that was never yours. You built your life around the validation of others. You wore costumes, performed roles, made yourself smaller or shinier depending on the audience. And now you can't do it anymore, and you grieve the time you lost to pretending. This is when the shame sets in, not because you were wrong, but because you were asleep, because you let them shape you, because you let yourself be defined by things so fragile, looks, likes, legacy. You feel betrayed, but the betrayal came from within. You betrayed your own knowing, and you think to yourself, if I'm not what I do, what I own, or what people see, then what am I? And the answer is terrifying in its silence. You wait for some divine revelation, but instead you're met with emptiness, and in that emptiness is the test. Can you exist without the scaffolding they gave you? The irony is that you finally become yourself only after losing everything that made you someone. The irony is that you had to fall out of favor with the world to return to your soul, and you realize that what they told you to worship was the very thing keeping you asleep. The gods of image, of productivity, of performance. You walk differently now, not with pride, but with awareness. You speak with pauses. You look people in the eye and see through the performance. You don't envy the shiny anymore. You pity it because you remember what it was like to be adored and yet feel unseen. You remember what it was like to have everything, except yourself, and yet, even in your quiet awakening, the world still calls to you. It offers you comfort, temptation, shortcuts. It dangles success in front of you like a returning lover, and some days you'll miss it. You'll miss being admired, being envied. You'll miss the feeling of belonging, even if it was all an act. But you'll know too much to go back. It begins with a flicker. Something shifts in your vision. Not your physical eyes know. It's subtler than that, more disturbing. You begin to notice the cracks in the picture you once believed was whole. You watch the world from a strange distance, as if you're no longer part of the play, but somehow still trapped on the stage. People speak, and their words don't match their eyes. Smiles stretch too wide. Laughter carries no warmth. The sparkle in conversations seems forced, like people are trying to convince themselves that everything is fine. You feel it in your bones. It's not, but no one wants to hear that. They want the show to go on, and it does go on, loudly, relentlessly. The ads scream at you to consume. The news bleeds, but never heals. Everyone's shouting, no one's listening. You see people scroll through tragedies with the same thumb that taps on lunch photos. Sacred and the shallow swim together in the same feed. There is no separation anymore. You start seeing patterns, repetitions. You realize how much of life is scripted, how much is habit. People don't choose, they repeat. They repeat emotions, beliefs, arguments, dreams. They speak in clichés, live in loops, die in routines. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The world becomes a carnival of masks, and you're the only one asking, what's underneath? You try to explain it, to share what you're seeing, but the words die in your throat. How do you explain to someone that you've stopped believing in almost everything you were raised on? That love feels manufactured, that morality is manipulated, that even the concept of freedom feels choreographed. They won't hear you, they can't, they haven't seen it yet. The most disturbing part isn't what you see in the world, it's what you begin to see in yourself, the lies you've told, the roles you've played, the times you traded truth for comfort, the way you smiled when you wanted to scream, the way you stayed quiet when your soul was begging you to speak, and you realize, this isn't new, this is who you've been. You peel back the layers and find imitation. You were taught how to behave, not how to be. You were trained to be liked, not to be real. And now that you crave authenticity, you find there's very little of it around. You watch people build digital temples to themselves, seeking attention like oxygen, curating images of lives they secretly hate. It makes you want to disappear, not because you're weak, but because everything feels tainted. Conversations feel like transactions. Relationships feel like performances. Work feels like servitude to systems that never cared if you lived or died, as long as you produced. You walk through society like a visitor at a theme park that's starting to rot. You see the power games, the manipulation, the way people weaponize kindness, seduce with guilt, hide behind virtue. You see it in families, in churches, in governments, in friendships, and worst of all, you see how normal it has become. The abnormal has dressed itself in suits and rituals. It has gone mainstream. You start losing the need to argue, not because you agree, but because you realize most people don't want the truth. They want validation. And when you give them truth, they see it as violence. They'll attack you, exile you, call you bitter. They'll say you've changed, as if that's a crime. This is the isolation they never tell you about. You will walk through rooms and feel invisible, not because you are unseen, but because you are no longer what they recognize. You no longer play the game. You've stopped dancing to the music, and to those still trapped in illusion, that makes you dangerous. You begin to long for simplicity, for silence, for honest moments that aren't recorded, for love that isn't displayed, for friends who don't flinch when you say something uncomfortable. You crave the raw, the unpolished, the sacred, but it's rare, so rare in fact that when you find it you weep. You question if maybe you've gone mad. Maybe it's easier to rejoin the crowd, to put the mask back on, to smile and nod and pretend that the emperor still wears clothes. But you can't, not anymore. You've seen too much. You've awakened in a world built for sleepwalkers, and now Every step forward feels like walking barefoot through a land of mirrors, and you realize the awakening was never about feeling better. It was about seeing clearly, and once your eyes are open, comfort becomes a stranger. The lie they sell is that awakening is gentle, that it feels like a sunrise or a warm bath, that you'll simply breathe deeper and smile more. But the truth is, it's a dismantling so ruthless, so deeply intimate, that it will eventually ask for the very things you thought you couldn't live without. And when that moment comes, when the voice inside says, "Leave that behind," it won't be something you hate. No, it will be something you've loved deeply. It will be a relationship you swore was soul-bound, a dream you chased for decades, a city that held your identity, a job that stroked your ego just enough to keep you silent. And you will tremble when asked to release it. The spiritual path is not cruel, but it is not sentimental either. It knows what must go. It doesn't care about your nostalgia, your memories, your comfort. It cares about truth, and truth is rarely polite. Truth does not negotiate. It demands everything false to fall away, even if that falsehood once felt like salvation. You begin to feel it before you understand it. A strange detachment, a growing discomfort around things that once brought you joy. You sit beside people you used to adore and feel a quiet ache, not because they've changed, but because you have, and part of you already knows, you won't be staying. Letting go of what you love isn't poetic. It's ugly. You cry, you fight, you beg. You try to bargain with your soul like a hostage negotiator. Can I just keep this one thing? Can I just stay a little longer? But the silence on the other end is unyielding. The path forward is already lit, and you know turning back means death of another kind. You pack your spiritual bags in pieces. Some things you leave overnight, others you carry far too long. A voice, a smell, a photograph. We drag remnants of the old world into the new, hoping we can keep at least a fragment of what once made us feel safe. But nothing false survives in the light, not even fragments, and then comes the loneliness. Not because you're alone, but because no one sees what you had to sacrifice. They don't see what it cost you. They see you walking away and call it selfish. They see you choosing silence and call it cold. But they don't hear the funeral songs inside your chest. They don't know what it took to leave. The worst part, the things you leave behind rarely chase you. People don't always ask why you disappeared. Dreams don't beg to be reclaimed, and that silence hurts more than their judgment ever could, because you realize what you loved most might not have loved you back, not the way you thought, not in the way that saves you. And sometimes what you must leave is not a person, a place, or a goal. Sometimes it's a version of yourself, the version who survived on applause, the version who settled, the version who made themselves smaller to be acceptable. And burying that self feels like burying a twin. You miss them, even as you outgrow them. You walk lighter, but the sorrow doesn't vanish. You laugh, but it echoes differently. You begin to understand the phrase sacred wound, because there are parts of you that will never fully close. You don't want them to. That scar is proof you had the courage to leave what you loved in order to become who you are, and then the whispers begin, in quiet hours, the soul speaking without words. You feel the faint warmth of alignment. You recognize that even pain can be holy. You start to sense that everything you surrendered was never the thing. Only a container, only a lesson, only a chapter, but not the whole book. You walk past the familiar with a quiet reverence. Not bitterness, not pride, but awareness. You bless what you once loved even as you release it. You don't need to destroy it to let it go. You don't need to hate it to know it can't come. You just need to bow. To yourself, to the path, to the silence, and still, on some days, you'll ache. The human in you will miss the comfort, will miss the illusion, will wonder if it was worth it, and the answer won't come in words. It will come in stillness, in the way your breath no longer shakes, in the way your eyes finally see, and you begin to realize that love, real love, is not possession, it is not clinging. Real love lets you walk away. They told you life was about becoming, that you needed to grow into someone worthy. So you built, you performed, you copied, you constructed a personality like a suit of armor stitched from approval, stitched from fear. You called it you, but it was never you. It was a mosaic of fragments borrowed from everyone but your soul. They handed you names before you found your voice. Good, obedient, smart, pretty, strong, names with invisible chains. Roles with invisible scripts, and you played them well. You smiled at the right time. You bit your tongue when truth burned in your mouth, and each time you conformed, you forgot a piece of who you really were. The world is brilliant at molding. It trims the wild edges of your nature, smooths you into something presentable, but that smoothing comes at a cost. It cuts away your wonder. It dampens your instinct. It silences the voice within that once shouted, "I am here, I am whole, I am enough." And you thought this was growth. You thought this was maturity, to put away the child and wear the mask, to hold your tears, to silence your intuition. But it wasn't growth. It was forgetting. It was a quiet erasure of your essence disguised as progress. It was death dressed in politeness. Then, one day, the mask cracks, not from outside pressure, but from the inside. A dream you can't explain, a memory that rises from the deep, a moment when you laugh without permission, cry without reason, and you feel something ancient stir in your chest, something untouched by the world. This is where the awakening begins, not in learning, but in unlearning. You begin peeling back the layers of imitation. You stop speaking like your idols. You stop chasing what they told you mattered. You grow suspicious of every should, every mold, every label that makes you smaller than the vastness you feel awakening within you. It is not an arrival, it is a returning, not to the innocence of ignorance, but to the purity of presence. You remember how it felt to speak without rehearsing, to move without performance, to dream without permission, and the remembering is painful because it shows you how far you wandered, and it's not just society you unlearn. It's family, teachers, lovers, cultures. Entire systems of thought begin to crumble under the weight of your truth, and this frightens people, because when you start remembering who you are, you threaten the illusion they are still protecting. You no longer fit their story. You're no longer the reliable one, the fun one, the logical one. You become unpredictable, and in a world built on predictability that makes you dangerous, they'll say you've changed. But you haven't changed, you've shed. You've stripped away the borrowed skin and stepped into your own, and the self you uncover is not polished, not polite. It doesn't always smile. It doesn't always please. It moves with instinct. It breathes with rhythm. It listens before it speaks. It remembers the earth, the stars, the silence between words. It is raw. It is powerful. And it terrifies the part of you still clinging to the old mask. You may feel alone because so few dare to remember. Most are still chasing transformation, not truth. But you will learn to enjoy your own company again, to walk with yourself in the quiet, to ask, "Who was I before they named me?" And that question becomes your compass. This journey is not about becoming extraordinary. It is about reclaiming the ordinary parts of you that were buried under shame, your softness, your wildness, your wonder, your knowing. You realize you never had to become anything. You only had to remember what you already were. And when you begin to live from this remembered self, the world responds differently, not always kindly, but honestly. Some will draw near, others will fall away. But your mirror becomes clearer, and you no longer search for yourself in other people's eyes. You look inwards now, not for answers, but for presence. And in that presence, in that quiet knowing, you begin to see. You are never lost, only hidden, only buried beneath who they told you to be. You will not survive this journey by force, the ones who muscle their way through collapse, because this is not a path of domination. It is a path of surrender, of dropping the sword, of laying bare your wounds without the need to justify them, and that, to the mind trained in conquest, feels like failure, but it is not failure, it is transformation. The reason most do not survive their awakening is simple. They thought awakening would be a climb, something they could master, conquer, add to their collection of achievements, but awakening does not offer trophies. It offers mirrors, and most people cannot look into the mirror and keep their illusions alive. They want the light without the heat, the wisdom without the sacrifice, the vision without the loss, but awakening demands everything. It strips you of comfort, of identity, of control. It breaks you open, not to harm you, but to show you what's underneath. And what's underneath is not always pretty. Beneath the masks there is grief. Generations of it, unlived lives, silenced cries, forgotten dreams. When you awaken, you inherit it all. The pain you ignored, the truths you buried, the voices you silenced, they rise, and you must sit with them, not to fix them, but to finally let them speak. It is not a journey of gaining, but of losing. Losing what you thought you needed. Losing who you thought you were. Losing the map, the script, the applause. Most people cannot handle this level of emptiness. It terrifies them, so they run back to distractions, back to noise, back to roles that kill them slowly, but at least let them sleep. They confuse awakening with enlightenment. They think awakening will feel good. But awakening is the burning. It is the fire that scorches everything false. Enlightenment may follow, but not before the death, and the death is brutal. It is lonely, it is sacred, but it is also misunderstood. The ones who survive are not stronger, they are not smarter, they are simply more willing to let go, to let the story end, to stand in the ashes of who they were and say, I am still here, not as an identity, but as awareness, as breath, as presence. They survive because they stop trying to escape. They stop reaching outward and start falling inward, and in that fall they find something the world could never give them, their soul. Not the soul dressed in philosophy or theology, but the raw, trembling essence that existed before words were invented to describe it, and when they speak slowly, as if every word costs something. Because it does, they have walked through fire, they know how sacred silence is, how precious truth becomes once you've seen how rare it is. They no longer argue for approval, they no longer decorate themselves in roles. They simply are. You'll see it in their eyes, the stillness, the weight, the quiet grief of someone who has died many times without ever leaving their body. They move through the world like old souls trapped in human frames. They are not enlightened gods, they are wounded healers, and their wounds still ache, but they've made peace with the ache. They no longer try to medicate it with applause or success. They carry it like an old violin. It hums when they speak, it sings when they love, it trembles when they're alone. It is their companion, not their curse. This is why most people never survive their spiritual awakening, because the world taught them to worship answers. Awakening teaches you to love the question, the world told them to build. Awakening asks them to tear it all down. The world promised safety. Awakening delivers truth, and truth is rarely safe. And yet, for those who make it through, there is something unshakable. Not happiness, not even peace, but clarity, a knowing, a stillness that cannot be taken. They may still grieve, they may still bleed, but they will never again be asleep. And in a world addicted to dreams, being awake is the most dangerous thing you can be.